Hello and welcome to this episode of the White House 1600 Sessions. I'm Stuart McLaurin, President of the White House Historical Association. Today, we are at Fort Belvoir, a U.S. Army installation located in Northern Virginia, about 20 miles south of Washington, D.C. And here at Fort Belvoir is a very special place. You might not know their name, but you've more than likely seen their handiwork. The Institute of Heraldry. Anytime you see the President of the United States speaking at a podium, usually right there on the front of that podium is a plaque with the presidential seal. And that plaque was made right here and nowhere else. This is the only place where the plaques for the President and Vice President are crafted and hand painted. The art of heraldry is very specific and goes back centuries, usually associated with military groups and nobility. Colors and symbols were used to create a design such as a coat of arms that was used as a form of identification. America's founding fathers were very cautious about adopting anything closely related to monarchy and the nobility. So while the origins of the Great Seal of the United States can be traced to the Continental Congress back in 1782, there was no standard design based on traditional heraldry representing the office of the President until the 1940s. Near the end of World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt asked heraldry experts and military personnel to redesign the presidential flag, seal, and coat of arms. FDR unfortunately died before the project was completed, but President Harry Truman saw it through, and in October 1945, President Truman signed an executive order establishing for the very first time a legal definition of the President's coat of arms and seal as used by the President. Well, a couple of years later, in November of 1948, President Truman did the same with designs for the office of the Vice President. And the Institute of Heraldry not only works with the executive branch, but also the U.S. military services and all the departments throughout the federal government. They work on decorations, badges, flags, and other insignia, which we're going to learn about today with our very special guest, Charles Mugno, Director of the Institute of Heraldry and a retired colonel with the United States Marine Corps. Charles has graciously welcomed us here and will share more about how this institute came to be, heraldic conventions, and then will take us on a tour where we'll meet some of the members of this team and we'll learn how the presidential and vice presidential plaques are actually made. So let's go and meet Charles. Hey Charles, how are you?
Hello, Stuart. Welcome to the Institute of
I could
Heraldry.
not be more excited to be here today. Ever since I learned about this place and this work, these seals we see everywhere, and you don't know the story behind the story, and you're going to share that with us today.
Yes, it's an honor to have you here and talk about what we do, because what we do is so unique within the federal government. It's worth a good story to have on it. So I'd like to start by showing you the coat of arms of the Institute of Heraldry. A coat of arms, just for background, is comprised of four elements: the shield, the crest above, the supporters that you see on each side, and then the motto banner at the bottom.
And this is for the Institute of Heraldry, this particular example?
That's correct. What we do through the coat of arms is define the mission or the purpose of an organization through the use of symbols. So it's a visual representation of our functions.
So tell us about these symbols and what they represent.
The red chevron here, the chevron is a very heraldic term that dates back to the 12th century. It represents the military. Above that is a heraldic term called a label. And it represents the three branches of government: the executive branch, the legislative branch,
sort of
and
three
the judiciary.
teeth there.
Exactly right.
Okay.
And then the reason that the label is above the chevron is because we have a constitutional requirement for civilian control over the military. So everything, it's not just the symbols, it's the arrangement of the symbols in the proper order to convey our mission. In the crest is a mythological creature called the griffin. The griffin is part eagle and part lion. And the reason it's used here in this composition is the eagle represents the United States and the lion represents Great Britain, which brings together the early development of heraldry from the United Kingdom.
And the star, the significance of the star on the
It
emblem?
represents the United States. So the Tudor rose represents the early colonization by the British Tudors, who brought with them the heraldic art form. And the star represents the use of heraldry within the United States. Our motto, which I think is a very powerful motto, is in Latin: honor is the strongest shield.
That's a great motto for a lot of things beyond just the Institute of Heraldry. How was this created and when was this created?
The Institute of Heraldry was actually created in 1960. Prior to that, we were a heraldic program office, a much more smaller office. But as our mission expanded, so did our role, and the Institute of Heraldry was created. In early 1960, we had a visiting herald from the United Kingdom, from the College of Arms, who worked with us to help design the coat of arms for the Institute. So we had a very knowledgeable and a very dedicated herald from the College of Arms helping support that design.
I wonder if a lot of Americans will see something like this and it looks very royal to them, very monarchy-like. Explain why this is important for us to have and is not just something that the king or queen of England might have, but is important for us to have here in the United States.
And that's a good question. When you study the origins of heraldry, it was really designed as a military function of identifying combatants on a battlefield. You need to understand, back in the 12th century, you only had two means of communication: visual and verbal. You could only project the verbal communication a short amount of distance, but visually you can convey a symbol, a flag, a banner, or whatever, at much greater lengths. So out of that need to identify on the battlefield came the creation of flags and banners and other means of developing symbols to identify the composition of the battlefield. So a knight wearing silver, his silver armor, looks just like another knight in silver armor. So the coat of arms was actually a textile garment that went over a knight's armor with the proper symbols and the proper color and the proper arrangement of identifying that individual, allowed his soldiers to see that's our leader. So the coat of arms was actually a textile garment. And out of that coat of arms grew this type of composition and this type of arrangement.
And then that has been deployed out through our military services in vehicles and armaments and uniforms?
Well, in the early formation of our government, our founding fathers really did not want to institute a formal heraldic program, because in the United Kingdom, it became known with nobility and the class system. And the use of heraldry was much used in the noble class and the clergy. The common class, or the lower class, really did not have heraldry. And so our founding fathers didn't want to have any type of art form or any type of program that represented the nobility to be implemented within the United States. So it wasn't until the early part of the 20th century that we started to see the need.
And what changed that perspective?
In the early part of the 20th century, the United States Army began to evolve as a global fighting force. World War I was the change for us. The Army had to expand exponentially, increase the number of divisions, increase the number of regiments, increase the number of battalions. With that increase in the unit size came the increase of heraldry, the flags, the insignia, the shoulder sleeve insignia, badges, and so on, to help with the representation of these new forces. After World War I, President Wilson sat down with the Secretary of the Army and he said, we probably need to create some sort of organization that oversees the development of heraldry for Army organizations. And then out of that came the creation of a heraldic program office within the U.S. Army as a staff agency, and we were Army-centric. And that's all we did was service the Army. But the second major mobilization of the 20th century was World War II. We now were starting to be asked other military departments, can you help us? And then the White House came to us and said, President Roosevelt would like to create presidential heraldry, we would like you to be involved in it. So now you have Army-centric military departments and in the federal government.
So presidents from George Washington all the way through Roosevelt and Truman, they didn't have that presidential seal that was on the front of a podium when they spoke.
Not as we see it today. There were other means of symbolizing the office of the president, but they were never really formalized to the point that we now have with presidential heraldry.
And what governs those standards? And what now determines this is the presidential seal? This is the seal of this department of government, or something new. I think the Space Force, for example, is brought into as a new entity within the military apparatus. How is how are the new standards for that defined and applied?
Keep in mind that heraldry is the symbolic representation of an individual or an organization. So the first thing that we do here is learn more about that organization. Who are you? What's your mission? What do you need? What are you trying to convey here?
Well, I think you and your colleagues have some of the best jobs in American government, and the uniqueness of it, the specialness of it, it's certainly a product of your work that is extremely visible every single day. Nobody in America can watch the news at night without seeing something that physical hands here have touched and been a part of. But I want to know about you. You're a Marine, so you have a Marine background. How does the Army feel about a Marine being in charge of this program?
That's an interesting question, I guess. As long as I provide the right support for heraldry to the federal government and the United States Army, that's okay with the Army. But I was a young lieutenant when I received my first medal. It was a Marine Corps Expeditionary Medal. And from that moment, I looked at that medal, looked at the ribbon, and I said, this is kind of interesting. And I slowly then became interested in the research of military insignia. And that enjoyment of studying the design, development of insignia for several decades allowed me that when this position became available, I became the luckiest guy in the world and had the best job in the federal government.
I completely agree with you. Have you talked with your peers and colleagues around the world, the French, the British, and talked about the commonalities in what you do? Or have you been helpful to emerging governments and militaries or governments that are creating a heraldry program?
We receive a lot of foreign dignitaries. We have had the Lord Lyon, King of Arms from Scotland, visit us. He brought his wife over. He had been here several times. The heralds from the College of Arms in England have been over here to visit. And the Canadian Heraldic Authority has been down. And it's just such a wonderful collegial group of people that deal with heraldry to be able to get together and talk about what we do here in the United States and make a comparison to what they do in other nations.
Is it like a language? Can you look at emblems, symbols, seals, medals of other countries and understand what they're trying to represent in those?
Yes, you can, particularly with England, because there are certain symbols that they use that identify the royalty, which if you look at royal coats of arms, you'll see the lion, which is a big element within royal heraldry. The harp is another one. So when I look at things, I can get pretty close to understanding what it's about. Even in the United States, I can say, well, this probably represents this.
Since President Roosevelt requested that first flag and seal during his presidency, and then he passed away and President Truman received it and approved it, how has that evolved and changed over the years, or has it?
It did evolve once. Obviously, in October of 1945, when President Truman signed the executive order, we had 48 states. And the seal and the coat of arms of the president has the stars representing every state in the Union that the president represents was 48 stars. So in 1959, with the addition of Alaska and Hawaii into the Union, we made our first change and only change in the presidential seal to add those two additional stars to the presidential heraldry.
So in the heraldry, the face of the eagle has never changed its turn from one grasp to the other.
Not true. Prior to President Roosevelt as wanting to formally establish the presidential heraldry, you would see the eagle of the presidential flag at the time facing to the left, the eagle's left instead of the eagle's right. In heraldry, you have two sides. The right is referred to as the dexter, and the left is referred to as the sinister. So when something faces the left, that's usually the secondary position. When you face to the right, that's the position of honor. So when the Institute at the time worked with the White House for presidential heraldry, we make sure that everything faces to the right.
And many Americans may have mistakenly heard the story that it represents war and peace.
That's correct, particularly with colonel insignia. Colonel insignia is an eagle, and then one talon is arrowheads, and the other talon is olive branch, representing war and peace, defense and offense. And there is a saying that, well, during war, colonel's eagles are manufactured so that the eagle faces the arrows, but during peace, in the insignia, the eagle faces the olive branch. It makes a nice story, and as a former colonel, I like it, but not necessarily
And certainly
true.
not true with presidential
Correct.
insignia. So Charles, let's go and learn more about the presidential heraldry specifically.
Well, what we have here is actually a very short summary of the different elements we provide in support of the presidential heraldry. You have the presidential seal, the presidential coat of arms, and the vice presidential seal. You have the development of the presidential flag, which was prior to 1945. This was used by the president, and this is after the October of 1945 executive order formally establishing the new flag for the president.
Do new presidents have an opportunity to learn about this, learn about what these physical representations are of their presidency?
We work very closely with the White House, and every now and then we will get inquiries that talk about, well, what's the right use for the presidential coat of arms versus the presidential seal? And we give them our best advice, but it's up to them to how they want to apply the use of these things.
Now, explain that to us. Would this be the coat of arms?
This is the coat of arms.
And this would be the presidential seal?
That's correct.
And explain to us the difference in the two and the use of the two.
The coat of arms represents the individual, and it represents the president. The seal represents the office of the president, which is why you have the designation band that talks about seal of the President of the United States. So this is an organizational identification, and this is an individual.
Now, what prevents, or does anything prevent, a new president from saying, well, I'd like to change something, or I'd like to do something a little bit different on my seal?
I know of no reason why they cannot do it, but there's something about heraldry that consistency in the application of a design and the visual representation has a legacy to it. And so you really don't want to disrupt that legacy of how we identify our executive branch.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be done because it's all done by executive order. So if the president wanted to make a modification, they have the authority to do it.
Can former presidents living use these seals?
I don't believe they can. Once they leave the office, they are no longer, part of the office of the president, and they no longer have the ability to show themselves as an individual, as the president, in use of the coat of arms.
So it was FDR originated, Truman accepted it and began using it. Then who was the first vice president to use the vice presidential seal as we see it today?
3 years after President Truman signed the executive order for the presidential heraldry, he signed an executive order in November of 1948 establishing the coat of arms, seal, and flag for the vice president of the United States. So there was a 3-year gap. So the vice president at that time was the first one in 1948, was the first one to be able to use that seal. And of course, we have presidential decorations. This is one of a handful of specialized decorations that the president would live.
And has this Medal of Freedom shown here, has this been what it originated under President Kennedy as and has been consistent?
That's correct. The Presidential Medal of Freedom is actually a concept that originated in December 1962 under President Kennedy. It evolved throughout 1963, and Mrs. Kennedy kind of became the lead and the focal point of our coordination in showing designs and prototypes of the medal as it developed. And it takes quite a while to do this type of artwork, particularly in the 1960s, because all the artwork was done by hand. Now we use computer-aided design, which is very easy to create.
And you also couldn't email it to the White House for them to take a look at it. It had to
That's
go
correct.
physically back and forth, and depending where they were at the time. Well, I love the connection between your work, and Mrs. Kennedy, as you know, she was our founder as well, and has quite an incredible legacy inside the White House and caring for that space. And I love learning that she also has an attachment to this.
When I read about the history and the development of the medal, and I read about the interaction between the director at that time, which was Colonel Temple, and his interaction with the White House, what a wonderful experience that must have been to actually sit down with the president and the vice president to go over the designs.
Well, this is incredible and fascinating. What other medals, other than the Medal of Freedom, would you do? All of the medals, all of the Medal of Honor, the Purple Heart, all of those are part of your work.
The Department of Defense, we are their exclusive agent to do designs for all the military decorations. So we are responsible for all that. All the other civilian institutions and organizations, they have the option of coming to us to request our services.
I'm intrigued by this table in front of us and these designs and what you have here. Share this with us.
What we have here are a few things. Let me show you how we start to do something. These are the actual manufacturing drawings for the seal of the president. So this document dates back to 1967, which shows the proper arrangement for the manufacturer to use in the development of creating the flag. The flags are done in Philadelphia. There's part of the Defense Logistics Agency. They have what they call a flag room. And every one of the flags for the president, the full-size flags, are individually stitched by craftsmen up at the flag room, and do it with such painstaking detail to represent the office of the president. So this is the one for the vice president. And you can see the vice presidential one is different because it only has 4 stars in each corner. It is not represented by the 50 stars. That's exclusive to the president. And then what we have here further is a higher resolution image of the center part of the coat of arms that goes on the flag, that allows the embroiderers up at the flag room to be able to know where to put each little stitch that goes into the flag.
What is this flag?
This flag is the first style 1948 design of the vice presidential flag. And it's a lovely representation. It has the iconic eagle of the federal period that if you go into the Capitol building and you go into some of the conference rooms around, you will see etched in glass and the globes and the lighting that were originally gaslit that are now electric, but those domes, the glass globes, are etched with this eagle. This is one of my
beautiful.
favorites.
That is gorgeous. Is there anything to the symbolism of the wings going down versus the wings going up?
These are called inverted wings, where these are pointed upward. I don't know of anything that defines when they should be inverted versus the other style of eagle. But it was in 1975 that Vice President Rockefeller requested a design modification of the 1948 authorization for the vice presidential heraldry, and to become more in line with what the president uses. So here you have the vice presidential flag using the same eagle as the president, but only 4 stars. And that 4-star representation is very much emblematic of all cabinet level positions. So the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Army all use that 4-star arrangement, and all they do is change the single design element to represent their organization, their office.
This is just really incredible. I know we have architects that do building design. What are the very talented people called who do this work? Who would do this work?
When you look at the standards that they're hired by, they're called illustrators, and that's the government term for hiring somebody that can do this type of work. I like to elevate their level of status, and I call them, internal to the Institute, heraldic artists, because that's a sign of respect for the very unique and very narrow art field that they are specialists in.
And incredibly talented. It's really magnificent.
They work very, very hard to learn the program, to learn what the symbolism, to learn the research, to create I think, the best heraldic art we've had.
It's fantastic.
And one other thing I'd like to point out is this is the post-1945 flag of the president. And it was used with the same four-star arrangement, which was typical throughout the federal government. But in December of 1944, they created a five-star grade for generals of the Army.
Oh, sure.
And President Roosevelt said, well, wait a second. How come a general can have more stars on their flag than I can as the President of the United States? And that was part of the catalyst, President Roosevelt seeing the stars, that led to the redesign of the coat of arms for the President.
Well, let's go see what's next.
Let's go into my office and I'll show you the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Fantastic.
What I'd like to go over now is the highest decoration that the President can award to any civilian or military leader, both within the United States or foreign dignitary. We have three representations of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This is the Presidential Medal of Freedom with distinction. This is the Presidential Medal of Freedom female variation, which was part of the initial concept. And this was the male variation. The difference being that the female variation was more of a brooch that would be pinned to formal attire, while the male variation was a neck ribbon and suspension, much like the Medal of Honor.
Mm-hmm. And what is the distinction? What justifies that, or on what occasion would that be given?
During the development of these awards in December of 1962, the White House says, well, the president wants to create a very high-level award representing our government, representing a stately recognition. So they asked the Institute of Heraldry to conduct a study. And they studied all of international decorations at the state level, at the country level. And they came up with the sash and pocket badge, which was the highest level used. And then you had a secondary level. So what makes the medal with distinction is that this is a sash under here that you see, much like nobility, that goes across the jacket. And then this would be placed on the left pocket. So it's a very high-level, distinctive, and easily recognizable identification of such a high award.
Is this still available to be awarded?
Yes, it is. In fact, the last one that I know of that was awarded with distinction was when President Obama was at the end of his administration, and he awarded then Vice President Biden with the Presidential Medal of Freedom with distinction.
Wow. This is incredible. And the Medal of Honor.
Yes, what we have here is the evolution of the Army Medal of Honor. This was the original design, and these are original medals from the period. The Army Medal of Honor was created in early February of 1862. It was preceded by the Navy Medal of Honor that was authorized in November of 1861. In 1896, the design was changed, but just the ribbon. Nothing else, everything remained the same. But in 1904, the Army decided that they wanted a more distinctive level of design of the planchen. So although it kept the five-star design, it was embedded in a wreath, and you still had a representation of the eagle. But now you're looking at that light blue ribbon, which is iconically representative of the Medal of Honor and the 13 stars. And then during World War II, they decided to make it a neck ribbon to elevate the level of prestige of the medal, so that you no longer wore it as a suspension medal, but now you had it front and center of the individual recipient.
So, Charles, this is actually a physical Medal of Honor from the American Civil War.
That's correct. That is an original one that was made in the 1860s.
So we have here examples of Navy, Army, Air Force. A Marine would receive the Navy?
Correct.
Is it possible to receive a Medal of Honor as being in the Coast Guard?
The Coast Guard is part of the Department of Homeland Security. But during national emergencies and times of direction by the president where he will allow or require elements of the Coast Guard to fall under the Department of Defense. When that happens, then they are eligible for Department of Defense recognition.
Wow, this is amazing. And do you keep these on hand in case the president says, I would like to give a Medal of Freedom this afternoon?
You know, that's a really good question. We design and we develop and we do some quality assurance. We are not a procurement agency. So when the president or the White House needs to reorder, or any agency for that matter, it's up to them to work with a certified manufacturer. you have to be certified by the Institute of Heraldry in order to make military decorations. And they are required to, when they place their orders, to use certified manufacturers to create the replacement orders.
Wow. Well, this is fantastic. Thank you for sharing with us this.
But let me highlight this one in particular. During President Trump's administration, he asked if we could look at options for redesigning just the presentation case, not the medal itself, but the presentation case. He wanted to see the first style presentation case is walnut with a silver medallion of the coat of arms of the President of the United States incised into the metal disc.
Yes, so it's flat there.
Correct.
That's right.
So what they asked for were design options, and we submitted several. And the First Lady Melania Trump, was very instrumental in reviewing the different designs and assisting with the selection. She really had a good idea for the design and conceptual development of the case. So now we have this darker wood with gold medallion of the coat of arms that is raised, not incised into the metal. And not only is the medallion gold, but everything else, the hinges, the catches, and
That is really beautiful. That's, I think, a transformational look in the casing. Very pretty. Thank you, Charles. I've really been inspired learning about the evolution of these medals and even the more recent involvement of our First Ladies, Mrs. Trump. Where are we off to next?
Well, I'd like to take you down the hall to meet my distinguished colleague, Tom Cacharo, and he'll walk you through the development process for how we actually take from a two-dimensional design and make it into a three-dimensional product.
Well, let's go meet Tom.
Okay.
Well, after a wonderful conversation with Charles, I've now been introduced to Tom Cacharo, who is taking us into a whole different level of understanding. Tell us your role, Tom.
Hi, Stuart. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much. Great to meet
Good
you.
to see you. I'm the division chief of the Technical and Production Division here at the Institute of Heraldry, and I have several colleagues that work with me. So once we get designs back, approved designs, we then work with what we call certified manufacturers throughout the country to produce the actual insignia. We have textile manufacturers we work with, and we also have metal manufacturers that we work with to actually produce the items for us, because we don't have the internal capability to do it here.
So what do we have before us?
So what I'd like to do is take you through a development process of insignia. What I would like to do is use the Presidential Citizens Medal, which is the second highest award that the President can award. We previously talked about the Presidential Medal of Freedom. When we develop a insignia, we get the drawings from our design division. We share those with a manufacturer that has the capability to produce this. Today, we're using technology. In the past, it was all hand-drawn, and it took forever to develop a medal. It could take up to a year. Nowadays, we use computer-aided design, and then we work with the manufacturer, and they interpret our design based off our instruction, and they actually send us a 3D now that we can look on the screen, make adjustments before they actually cut steel. So with that in mind, I'd like to show you what we did back in 1969 for the Presidential Citizens Medal. So in 1969, President Nixon asked us to create this, so we sent them several designs over to the White House. The President actually picked this one, but in this letter it came back and said we would like it to be rounder than what this design is. So it's the same design, we just cleaned it up. Once that was done, we worked with a manufacturer that actually cut the die. So in this case, there's a base die, there's a device die, and then the back stamp die. And what they did is they actually produced samples for us, and these are some of the original samples from 1971. And based off of these samples, I have a person that's a specification writer, and they would take very specific measurements of all of these pieces, and we would write a government specification. So now today, so these dies were created in 1970. So if these medals are produced today, the manufacturer that gets the order will contact us. We will provide the government dies to them, and based on the government dies and the specification, they will produce medals. So the medals that the President awarded in 2023 were struck by the same dies for the original medals of the 1970s.
Wow, that is just incredible. And what are these made of? They're incredibly heavy.
So it's called an S7 tool steel alloy. So it's a very dense and hard steel, and it's tempered to a certain hardness where we actually have a machine to test that. Because when these are put in the presses, sometimes the metal is what they call squeezing it at 20 tons per square inch. So it's a lot of pressure to get the design up in the metal. So they have to be very, very, very durable.
That's incredible.
And like I said,
beautiful.
this one's been around. We've had it for 50 years.
Wow, incredible, Tom. And so you would have this type of die for the Medal of Honor, this Presidential Medal. What other medals would have?
That's correct. We have all of the medals of honor, the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force medals of honor. We have all of the medals that you would normally see a service member receive, whether it's the Purple Heart, the Silver Star, a Good Conduct Medal, an Achievement Medal. We have all of that there downstairs, and we loan those out for production.
Wow, beautiful, really beautiful. So Tom, where are we off to next?
We're off to show you how we do the actual presidential seal.
Well, tell me, how many people work in the Institute of Heraldry?
For a very large mission that we don't have a lot of people. We have 19 highly dedicated, highly skilled federal employees on our staff.
And they are Department of Army,
That's
all
correct.
of them. And what is the training, or what is the background that you look for when you're bringing someone onto this team?
Well, it depends on what they're being hired for. We have everything from program managers, which essentially do the triage. So when an agency comes to us and says, we would like a coat of arms or a seal or a decoration, they do the triage to see if it's something that we would undertake. Then if we select it, it then goes to the Heraldic Design Division, which is the heart of what we do. These are the heraldic artists that actually do the analysis, the study, the organization, and take a thought process and put it into a two-dimensional product. And then once that's done, if needed, it goes into the three-dimensional process in the technical division, where they take that two-dimensional art and then create a three-dimensional object.
Wow. So as we continue, the Wall of Presidents. Tell me about this.
Well, it dates back to President Truman, who was the first one to, in October 1945, formally establish the Presidential Coat of Arms. And ever since then, we have the presidents who have actually signed their portrait with a salutation to the Institute of Heraldry, thanking us for the service that we provided under their administrations.
Oh, fantastic. Wow, that's really great. So I've finished talking with Tom in your office and seen the dies and that part of the process, and we've come down the hall to the nerve center of where these are actually created with the man that does this. Tell me about where we are and who we're with now.
We are now in our sculpture and display making section. This is where we do all the fabrication of the presidential seal, to include the priming, the finishing, and of course the hand painting of each of the seals. But I'll turn that over to Mike Craighead. Mike is our senior representative. He's been doing this for 22 years now in fabricating all the different plaques for the president and the vice president.
Mike, it's an honor to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Really, Trey. Thanks for welcoming us into your studio here. I'd love to hear what you do.
Well, when I came on board, we had a master sculptor here, Don Borgia. He's largely responsible for a lot that you see here. He would make the plaques, sculpt them, but my job was to duplicate them, and my job is to get them ready for the public and to the White House organization. I make them for the White House Communications Office, Air Force One, HMX-1, the White House military. Every time the president speaks, it's mostly with a podium, and we have two different size podium plaques, an 8-inch and a 10-inch. And then we have like wall plaques, they're 15-inch. Over here I have some 25-inch on the wall and a picture of George Washington. He is wearing the original Continental Army uniform, and the buff and the blue are in the presidential seal. That's where you get these colors. The president is also wearing a chevron, a blue chevron. That's this color here. This is heraldically, this is the president, and these stripes are Congress. So the 25-inch are mostly interior, plus they're on the porch. There's a picture of the Easter Bunny at Easter. It's out on the porch, and that's where the 25-inch is.
So, Mike, tell us how these are actually fabricated now.
Okay, what I do is there are plasters made. Well, after the sculptor is done, I'll make a final plaster of his work, and I'll make a mold of that. Then I'll pour a resin into the mold, I let it cure 24 hours. I come in the next day and take it out of the mold, and you end up with a resin plaque. And then I have a shop downstairs that helps me clean it up a little, take off the extra. And sometimes there's some debris on the front here. I sand that off, clean this up, and get it ready for painting.
And so from this stage to this stage, how long does that take?
It's about a little under a month, but it depends too on deadlines and things like that. But I have different techniques. Sometimes I'll mask them. Sometimes I'll hand paint them. Once in a while, we get a rush order in, and I do whatever I can. But I always want it to have a polished look, a very, pretty much like here. Now, the White House Communications Office, when I'm done painting them, they have a glare on them from the one-shot sign paints I use. I will use a flat spray for the White House Communications Office to keep the photo glare down.
Oh, sure.
Because if it's photographed like this, they're almost white. They're almost the color of the vice president plaques.
To really see the difference between the gloss and the flat there.
Now, the plaques I've made are basically resin, but for Air Force One, they have to be a certain weight. So for that, I have an Air Force One plaque. I make the resin front in a mold, but I inlay a carbon fiber. It has to be 450 grams or less. So the carbon fiber takes a lot of the weight away, but adds a lot of strength to it because these are used on the they're used on the vice president plane, but they put Velcro on the back. So when they put them up, they'll be put them up and taking them down, pulling them off. There's a lot of wear and tear on these, so they needed that strength. So that's basically why that I have to use a different technique for those.
Wow, this is incredible. What type of paint do you use? Is there something special about the paint?
It's a one-shot sign paint they used starting back in the 30s or 40s. It has a kind of an aluminum base to it or a metal base, and they're very strong, and they're just great to work with.
Wow.
Plus, I can use turpentine to dilute them and things like that.
So how did you decide how to solve this problem with the glare? What was the solution there?
Mostly out on the market were acrylic sprays, and they still weren't getting rid of the glare. There was still some glare. So I am studying fine art in my spare time, so I use what's called an archival spray paint that's removable, and it just takes away all of the glare, all of some of the paint lines, and it worked perfect. And I haven't had any complaints since. That's what they want on those. And I also, I don't know if I mentioned, I repair plaques. I not only make new ones, I repair the plaques, and they'll bring them in, and this method also I can wash off easily and spray it back on.
What was it like the first time when you started this job and you turned on the television and you saw the president standing behind a podium with something that you had made?
My concern, believe it or not, is the glare. They usually look pretty good. If I'm done in it, looks pretty good. So it's just the glare part of it. Because I have noticed ones without it, and the color's washed away, and that's what bothers me. But for Air Force One, I'll use an acrylic coating because it's a little tougher. This coating could smear if it's handled too much. So there are some different aspects.
And how are these affixed to the front of the podium?
Well, when it leaves here, the White House takes them to another department where they fix the backing on these, because if the podium's real high, the plaque needs to be, leaned a little. The backing will be made for that, or to be flat. So the different podiums, these are all matched up to different podiums.
So you've been here for over 20 years, Mike. How many do you think you average making a year? And in the course of your career, how many of these do you think you've touched?
Hundreds. We've often commented that we don't know where they go, but they always want more.
So there's no shortage, Mike, of television shows now about the White House, from West Wing to all these other shows. Are you a source for their props, or do they copy your great work?
From what I noticed, they copy it, and they're not. They don't look that great.
Well, those scoundrels.
Yeah.
So, Mike, can I actually see you doing some of this?
Yes, sir.
Great,
Right this
let's
way.
go. So, Mike, this is your studio. What happens
Yes, sir.
in this space?
My inner sanctum. This is where I paint the plaques, and right here I have an Air Force One plaque. All the gray is primer, and one of the techniques I use is, you can see the buff color here. I will paint that first on the eagle, and then let it dry. But then I let the sculptor do the work. I come in with the brown paint, and I do a wipe, and wipe it away, and let the sculptor do the work. And so it also gives a glow. It's not just a flat brown color. Now here I have some light green paint. Now all I'll do is take a darker green paint and spread it on there. See what fun this is? I'm not even worried about.
Not coloring within the lines there.
And I'm adding the darker value. And then what I'll do is come in and I just do a wipe. And that lets the painting underneath shine through. And then the darker paint goes into the crevices and gives kind of a, then I can come back later and touch the olives up if I want. But that's how I handle the branch and the eagle.
And how did you learn how to do this? Was it trial and error?
Well, yeah, I was basically taught when I first came here by Don Borgia, but this wipe method is what they showed me at first. But sometimes the sculpting isn't as good as I want. I'll paint the feathers in, or I'll paint shadows in, whatever I can to make it look good for the public.
Wow, so each one of these that you see is an individual work of art.
Exactly.
This is not a cookie cutter process.
No.
This is a masterpiece, each one of them. And it's only a shame. If I were President of the United States, Mike, I'd let you sign your name at the bottom of each one.
Well, this particular plaque right here, that was sculpted by Don Borgia. This was done in the medallic method, and his initials are right there in the branch.
Oh.
If I were to paint the branch, the color of the wood, and there you would
see his initials there.
Little DB there.
That's a fantastic
Back to
piece
back.
of presidential trivia. This is incredibly special. I do feel like I'm in the center of where it all happens, and to see it come to life like this in your very talented, careful, delicate hand. Every time I see a presidential seal, from now on, I will think of you and Charles and Tom and all of your colleagues here. It's really an incredible thing that you do for our country.
Well, we go to the plaster room now, and I can show you where I
Great, let's go. I'd love to see it. So, Mike, what is this space? And tell me what we have here.
Well, this is my plaster room, and this is where I keep my plaster to help make the molds. And also, every time when I make a mold of a plaster, I'll make a new plaster and put it up here on the shelf. And this is where I need to go when I need to make a plaque. Now, the molds wear down. That's why I have to depend on the plaster. I also use the plaster for backing. You'll see that whenever I make that. So
now I understand it's evolving to a new process that we're going to see shortly.
yes, sir.
And you will still have to paint those individually, even though the plaster element is a different creating process.
Right. And there's, advantages and disadvantages to new techniques, but I'm finding it working out well on the ones I have painted from the machine.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, here on this shelving, I see all kinds of molds. What are these that you see here?
Well, these are molds, and these are the plasters that I use to make the plaques. These are what I need to keep going, and it's old world technique. Some of these plaques hanging out here are plaster themselves. The plaques you see in the room are made for government agencies, and we'll make 3. we'll give our client 2, and I keep 1 and hang it on the wall. And if we ever have to make one in the future, we don't have the color code written up. I can just match them
Wow.
to plaques on the wall.
Well, I am awed. This is just really an incredible thing, and what you do is so masterful and so important. So thank you for sharing it with us.
You're welcome. And now you can see the future.
Yeah, let's go take a look at that. So Charles and Tom, we are concluding our incredible tour of the Institute of Heraldry here in this space, where the ancient customs and traditions of heraldry that we've talked about meet the 21st century. And tell us where we are and what the future looks like.
Sure. So we just got through with Mike upstairs, and he showed you how he makes the presidential seals. What we're going to do is we're transitioning to new technology where we're using 3D CAD design to design the presidential seals, and we're using a CNC machine to cut them out of a high-dense foam. And this is a very durable foam, and it allows us to cut them quicker. We can cut them in about 8 hours. We shoot primer on it, and Mike could be painting these within 24 hours of them completed. Upstairs, it takes them 2 weeks to get to the process before we can paint. So we're going to cut time off. We're also going to save costs because it's cheaper to do it this way. And the last thing that is beneficial is we use less hazardous materials because the resins and the things it uses now are hazardous. And so this is a lot cleaner for the environment to do it this way as well.
And how long has this machine been in operation?
So we installed it about 1.5 years ago. We are still in the process of learning its capabilities and finding the shortcuts to make it more efficient. We have cut some of the vice presidential seals because it had the least amount of detail to it and it was very easy to get those done. So we have delivered 10 of those to the White House and they're happy with them. But we are still in the transition period. But I hope by next FY we're fully producing them this way.
Can we see a demonstration of this?
Absolutely. We can turn it on for you.
Great. I'd love to see that.
Takes about 8 hours to cut one.
And what would this size be used for?
Anytime you see a 15-inch plaque, it's generally a wall plaque. Now, if you go back, there are some pictures of John F. Kennedy at NASA, and it was a 15 on the front of the podium. But now it's primarily used as a wall plaque, and based on the lectern that the president's using, you'll either see an 8-inch plaque or a 10-inch on the lectern staff. It's a little noisy. It's not too bad, but...
Well, so seeing this to culminate the visit is really incredible, very impressive. And I want to thank you, Charles, and you, Tom, for welcoming us here today and your colleagues and the amazing work that you do for our country. And I know that everyone who watches this program will be inspired, as I am, by what you do and what you have really contributed to the symbolism, the imagery, the visualness of the presidency of the United States and all of our branches of the armed service. Now, I can't conclude this episode without giving one hat tip. It was a member of our National Council on White House History, Alan Hall, who several months ago said that, I love watching your podcast, but you really need to go down to the Institute of Heraldry and see what they do. So it was that great idea by our wonderful member of our National Council on White House History that brought us here today.
It's always a thrill for us at the Institute of Heraldry to demonstrate how the Department of the Army provides this very unique service to all elements of the federal government, particularly to the White House. So it's been an honor and a pleasure for you to have taken the time to come visit us.
Well, if the White House Historical Association had a medal for greatness and service to our country, I'd give you both one today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening and watching today. Be sure to subscribe to the White House 1600 Sessions on your favorite podcast provider so that you never miss an episode. And please watch the video version on YouTube and Facebook. Your support of the White House Historical Association makes this work possible. When you become an association member, or when you purchase a book or an official White House Christmas ornament, you are helping fund the education mission through our teacher programming, our publishing, and our latest initiative, one that I'm extremely excited about, the People's House, a White House Experience. In September 2024, we will launch this new immersive experience at 1700 Pennsylvania Avenue. The People's House will be open to everyone. You can learn more about our work as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization by going to our website, whitehousehistory.org. Thank you very much.